Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Shop Talk, hosted by the Triangle Area SQL Server Users Group. As always, Shop Talk is our time after work where we get to talk about different topics, bring in some chat, have some interaction, and mostly just have some fun near the end of a Monday. So, for tonight, we have count them, three people, including me. I kind of include myself in this. To my direct right, Tracy Baggiano.
Hello?
The now crystal clear Tracy Baggiano.
Yes, I fixed my camera.
And to my other right, Tom Norman.
Good evening, everyone.
Who is now using a fancy new camera.
That's right.
Basically, everybody has better cameras than I do.
And you're the pro recording classes.
I'm
There's
also
something wrong
the
with
cheap
this.
person. All right, so introductions aside, Shop Talk, the way this works is drop your questions, comments, thoughts in chat. I read them aloud. Sometimes I give snarky responses. Quite often, we try to give reasonable answers, or at least reasonable sounding answers. On tonight's docket, first thing up, Tom, you recently migrated some VMs to Azure SQL Database.
Yeah, we recently actually migrated from an Azure VM server to Azure SQL Database, and we actually have it a failover cluster, or not failover cluster, but an availability group between the East Coast and West Coast. Mm-hmm. And as we were doing that, one of the things that we discovered, and thanks to John Morehouse's article, is that we had some SQL auth security that basically, just like on-prem, if you have different servers, that you've got to keep them basically the logins, you've got to basically keep them in sync, whether it's AD or whatever, but master and MSDB does not sync up. I was kind of hoping that it already had the 2019 feature, because Kevin, in 2019 going to have basically, we can add master and MSDB and all that fun stuff into an availability group. Isn't that in 2019, I heard? Or am I dreaming that?
You have definitely heard that, whether it's in
We
2019.
definitely heard that, but I haven't actually seen it in practice, but we heard that at Summit.
Yeah. Anders mentioned they took it out. I thought I remembered it not making it to RTM.
Okay. All right. So anyway, so I was thinking, I was kind of thinking, with the SQL Azure database availability group kind of being probably on the 2019 code base, that would already be there, that, it would sync the logins and stuff, but not the case. So SQL Azure database in two different locations with an availability group, you still have to manage the logins between the two if you add them between both locations. So that's my experience.
Anything special you had to do to get that working?
No, nothing really special besides just what we had done, where we discovered it was working fine on the East data center. We failed it over to test the failover on the West data center. And of course, everything stopped working. So then we were like going, okay. And we knew that it was a connection string. It was failing to connect and stuff. So we knew that was going on. I think I actually ended up even putting the profiler on it or maybe it was through the Azure portal that we actually saw insights and stuff that we saw it wasn't connecting. And then basically what we did was we just went in and added the security, and everything started working again after we restarted IIS, because the web servers were still not in the farm, not up in Azure. So we had
Right.
to. They're now up in Azure, but they weren't at the time. So
Okay, makes sense. So I did get confirmation here. It looks like the feature had some challenges and did not make it into GA, and it might be in a CU later on, but don't know. Don't know if it will be. Just add security, seen on all drink mixes. It is.
yeah,
It
just
security does come in a powdered form. That's all
yeah,
I'm
you
going to say
just
about that.
you definitely, if you've got an availability group, a failover cluster, whatever the case may be, you still have to manage all the Microsoft database things that you put in there. You know, whether it's jobs, policy-based management, you name it. Anything that's Microsoft in Microsoft databases, whether it's on-prem or in the cloud or in Azure SQL database, you just got to make sure and keep them in sync.
Yeah, and that's where the promise of being able to replicate master MSDB and other system databases really comes in. So when it does make its way out to production, that'll be really cool.
I'm ready. I'm ready. Let's do it.
Yep. So Tom will beta test that.
Yes, I will. I'll be glad to.
Anders says, just give me MSDB. I would like both. Honestly, because I'd rather also have all the niceties from master. That's where I store all of my user tables.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting that at least in my workshop, we actually we use SQL Server data tools, and we actually use post deployment scripts to manage all of our security jobs, etc. Everything that we can manage that we do. So we have published profiles that basically, like on our availability group, it says, okay, go, we got an availability group in prod to the regular instance, then we got availability group in master that goes to the secondary instance, and we just have to fire it twice instead of just firing it once. We got to fire it on both sides to put the security and stuff on. So
right, and
anyway.
I've seen people put together SQL agent jobs that try to keep things in sync, that try to replicate logins and users over.
And I will put a plug in for DBA tools. Will help you do that also. So yeah, you get things out of sync.
DBA tools will definitely do that. Ironically enough, Anders says that security is easy to keep in sync compared to jobs, just as I was finished talking about SQL agent jobs. Yeah, that's true, because that all lives in MSDB, so none of that gets migrated over. So you fail over to the other system, and suddenly all of your backup jobs and indexing jobs and data cleanup jobs, why are these things not running anymore? Oh, they don't exist on the secondary.
Exactly.
No history. Also a good point.
Yeah, I know that when we recently went to our new product at work, we actually, our upgrade path and failover path was, we had a failover cluster instance that was running it before we upgraded, and to have a backup plan, what we did is we basically failed over to the third node of the availability group. And we started running everything over on that third node, and we ran it that way. I was thinking, oh, I want to run it a day or two. We ran it for like 3 months. And, I had like, okay, I'm missing this job. I'm missing this. I'm missing this. I'm missing this. So it did help get me basically to where the third node was, okay, now it's production, ready. So, and everything, and made sure that I, again, in my SQL Server data tools, making sure I had all the jobs scripted and all that kind of stuff so that they would get deployed everywhere. So.
Yeah, and it's nice to be able to do that when you have the other servers that actually do have all of your information still available to you.
Yeah, it is.
Having 4 hours to bring your secondaries to live. 4 hours is plenty of time.
If it takes you 4 hours to bring your secondary to live, you'd be in trouble. should be like what, minutes? So
Depending on how much you have to do, where you have to start from. 1,800 databases per server. Yeah. So I had to deal with a company that had about 2,000 or so databases per instance, all of which were mirrored using standard edition.
ooh, that'd be fun. So
Yep.
you're talking database mirroring, the old database mirroring, not the good old availability group.
Yeah, well,
One database at a time.
I don't even think SQL Server could stand 2,000 some availability groups. I mean, technically there's no limit on how many availability groups you can have, but these were very small databases that were not that commonly used, not that frequently used. So actually, really what they needed was one database that stored all the customer data. And instead they had every customer on their own database. And so Anders runs 300 databases per AG. Yeah, if you bundle together a bunch of databases into an availability group, that's not the worst problem. It's not as nice as having few databases and few AGs, but having one database per AG is, when you have that many databases, I seriously don't think
you do that?
I don't think it would work. I think the overhead is just too high. Even with database mirroring, it was like, let's set the thread pool to ridiculous numbers. And if they ever had a bunch of people all try to log in and connect at the same time, the server would fall over, no doubt. But don't worry, there's a secondary over there that may or may not have be working at the time. Because when you have 2,000 plus databases, if you do fail over, that takes a little while.
Oh yeah.
Even if they're tiny databases. If I remember right, database mirroring, that failover may even be one database at a time.
It is.
Single thread
Database
replay. Yeah, I
mirroring
thought
is
so.
one at a time. Yeah. That's why they came out with AGs.
Yeah,
So you
and
can group them.
those are nice for reasonable scenarios. So my recommendation is have a reasonable scenario.
Correct.
We had to write our own log shipping with that many databases. Writing your own log shipping probably would have worked better than trying to use the built-in log shipping.
Great.
Thankfully, that company didn't do replication. But in all seriousness, like, it would take up dozens of gigabytes of space across all 2,000 some databases. That may even be, and frankly, a lot of that was just free space because the databases were auto-sized to a certain amount. So
Yeah.
it's the type of thing where they went horizontal when they should have gone vertical.
I actually had replication in one of my shops, and I never want to have replication again. It works great when it works, but when it goes down, it's a bear to try to figure out what's happening.
It can be. Now, was that transactional replication, merge, peer-to-peer?
Transactional.
Okay, easy mode replication, yeah. So
Yeah.
transactional replication has by far the most information available to it. It's merge replication where you start scratching your head and trying to figure out what exactly is the problem here when things don't work. When they do work, yeah, it's kind of amazing when you think about it. And if you architect merge replication correctly, like not having the possibility of conflict, so you only write to the subscribers, and the publisher is essentially a clearinghouse, and the subscribers, you don't use identity columns, and you have some sort of subscriber ID that's part of the key for every relevant replicated table, merge replication's a beauty. But if you don't do that, I can tell you all about the types of pain that happen. Like when customers try to write to publisher and subscriber, and there end up being conflicts because the two records, which are both the same, have different row GUIDs.
Oh yeah, that sounds like fun.
And by the way, if you have enough of those, it actually slows down merge replication to the point where it can take a very long time to cycle through because it has to recheck and retry those conflicts. And it can't simply say, well, wait, these two are exactly the same save for the row GUID. Why don't I just kill one of them and take the other? Even if you manually go to the conflict detector and you say, take that one, it doesn't. Actually, I had to write a process to check the replication conflict tables looking for specific types of error codes, find the relevant records that are associated with it, delete them from the publisher because the subscriber was trying to push them up, even though they existed on the publisher with a different row GUID, and then it would just work again. But that took a lot of time to figure out.
A lot of pain.
Yeah, and Anders points out, look, there are really good use cases for merge replication, and sales up during the day, inventory changes down at night. That's a perfect use of it because you're essentially sending data one way for a particular data point or a particular type of data. You're not necessarily sending sales changes back down to the subscribers. You're sending the sales changes up to be centralized. You're sending inventory out broadly to your subscribers. They can update the inventory, I would assume, but even then, you don't necessarily have conflicts, especially if you do design it appropriately. But you know, not that many people get into merge replication thinking I need this to be merge replication. Instead, it just ends up being, oh crud, we have merge replication that we need to add. Let's shoehorn this in right here and hope it works in this database. So, yeah, no, I'm definitely not gonna say I'm pleased with the way merge replication works. Frankly, it could be faster and it could be a lot easier to understand. For example, I want the ability just to say, hey, how far behind am I? And how long will it take for me to catch up? And the idea of launching tracer records, just, that's not an answer.
You don't like tracer records? Come on.
It's not a real answer.
Yeah, you're right.
Like, this is... I understand the concept of it, and you know that it feels like they had to give you an answer, and so they shoehorned it in. But I think proper reporting structure around replication would solve about 40%, 50% of replication problems, and a better set of guidelines and like a check process would solve another 30 or 40% of replication problems. So Andrew says he had a system just to monitor it. Yeah, and I would have been interested to see $5 million of love from Microsoft would solve most of it. Yes, but replication's not going to sell copies of SQL Server. That's going to make it a lot harder to actually get a lot of real work done with replication. It's not going to, unless some giant company says, we're going to buy this many thousands of copies of SQL Server if you make replication do this. I don't think it happens. Also, considering that the attitude of most database professionals when they hear about replication is
run.
Like a vampire seeing a cross in sunlight.
Run as fast as you can.
Yep. It You're not going to see much user voice activity. You'll see a cadre of people who are willing to admit they know about replication. Even then, it'll mostly be transactional. Like, yeah, let's make transactional replication a little bit better. Let's support it in this scenario. Like Azure SQL Database supports transactional, doesn't support merge replication. It's not that bad when you figure out, although it appears nowhere on my resume. Me neither. Me neither. Merge replication, I've never heard of merge replication in my life. So, Inachu asks, what database is best for video games? I've seen quite a few use MySQL. I'm going to take a drink. Let's see if Tracy or Tom has thoughts on this topic.
I do not. What about Microsoft Edge or SQL Edge? Why not? Let's put it on a Pi device and see how fast it can run.
So that wouldn't work so well for video games, I don't think. Honestly,
Not
the
enough
short,
RAM.
I know, I'm just a killjoy tonight. The short answer is whatever you know. And I'm not really joking that much about it. People pointed out, yeah, some customers use SQL Server. Anders mentions EVE Online uses SQL Server, and I can believe that. I've seen cases where people use Cosmos DB. If you're talking about a smaller application, especially if you're writing a open source game, you might be using something else like SQLite, just because I need to have some data structure. I need to have some quality structure within my game and don't need to go too crazy with it. Frankly, for a lot of these, you don't even necessarily need a database as long as you have decent memory structures and you basically design that out. You can, in a lot of cases, your save file is sort of a binary representation of the structures in memory all saved to disk. So what do you want to store to the database? Right, that's a good question. If you're talking about something like user scores, like if you're trying to do a competition, who's on the leaderboard, or if you want to have a history of who played whom, that kind of thing, there is a pretty good scenario that the Cosmos DB team put out about how they are used in some online games to do that sort of thing and to replicate out globally. If you're talking something a bit smaller, building a private WoW server, I don't know that I could answer anything specifically on World of Warcraft. I have successfully avoided that in my life. That was like several thousand hours that I didn't have available to me to play the game. So I don't know what would be involved in trying to build your own. Pretty much all EMUs use MySQL. Yeah, MySQL is going to be pretty popular. Postgres will also be fairly popular, simply because they're free, they're open source. The licensing agreements aren't too bad. Although with MySQL, maybe you're talking MariaDB now, so that you can get away from the Oracle juggernaut. But I do see a lot of that in the open source community because, again, it's freely available. The code is open source. It's relatively easy to get into, and you don't have to worry so much about redistribution. If you're running something locally, I would say probably, again, do what you know best. If you're more familiar with a particular database platform, especially if it's something personal, use that thing. Like SQL Server, Express Edition, even Developer Edition, if it's truly personal. So, Lysanki had so many friends at IBM trying to suck me into WoW. I just said, wow, how can you spend your time like that? The game is... Those types of games get to be very addictive. They They definitely will take a lot of time. They're fun until you realize that you now have a new job. And that job is essentially, well, all right, I gotta go work for the guild for 4 hours today. Gotta get in all of my daily tasks. And it's sort of like I used to play a lot of The Sims. And every once in a while, I'll get back into The Sims. And I'll go in there for about like 40 or 50, 60, 100 hours and realize that essentially I am reliving my own life over and over and over again. And then I say, wait, I could just do this myself in real life. And then I quit the game for a while. And a couple years later, I come back to it because it's a really fun game. But essentially, a lot of modern games become jobs where I've got to go in, especially mobile games. They will drag you in and, all right, I've got to log back in. I got to go play this game today. I've got to use up all of my stuff. Get my crystals and my rubies and my diamonds and my 8 other types of currency. And then grind for 2 hours so that I can build up experience, so that I can grind for more hours, so that I can build up more experience, so I can grind for more hours.
He has personal experience with this. He walked right by me in the airport playing games one time, and
I'm
did not
surprised it
even
was only the
notice
one
me.
time.
He probably did it more than once, but
I probably have done it more than
we
once, yes.
tweeted it one time though. So
All right, Anthony dropped in a paper link. I'm gonna copy this so that I can take a look at it later, because from the title alone, it looks pretty interesting. Multi-future merchant transaction prediction. So, I'll have to read the full text later. Thanks for the link. Next thing I want to talk about. Next thing on the list here. Azure Notebooks is shutting down October 9th. I just learned about this today. I am saddened. It doesn't sound like it in my voice, but I used Azure Notebooks a lot. It was in preview. It was in preview for about 2 years. And one of the nicest things about it was it gave you Jupyter Notebooks in a cloud environment entirely for free. And I know that they were losing money on it because it was entirely free. They had this option where you could spin up your own data science virtual machine. You could attach that and then use Azure Notebooks if you wanted more power. But if you just wanted some cheap 1-core, couple gigs of RAM VM, they just give it to you. So like Google Colab. Yes, like Google Colab. I'm not sure how much is in Colab is truly free tier, but yes, similar construct. Unlike whatever AWS has, because they're never free at anything. I think I still get charged 1 penny for my usage of S3 because I have like 100 megabytes of utilization or something. They only bill me, I think, once a year or so because it's not worth billing me 1 cent per month. So they wait till the end of the year and get the full 12 cents. Colab will even give you a free GPU. That's pretty nice, yes. Think I heard Tom diss Edge a little bit. Were you knocking on
No, I wasn't dissing it. I was just going, hey, we got Edge there. Let's go put it out there on that and see what'll happen. So, now with I need to get my Pi back from my grandson and play around with that and see what it'll do.
Is it a Raspberry Pi 4?
Yeah, it's the one I won at Summit last year. It was underneath my chair at Summit. So it should work. I hope they gave me something that it'll work.
Yeah, because if they gave you a Pi 3, I don't think those work. I think you needed more RAM than the 3 had available. It would have been a little bit of a downer. Like, hey, here's a Pi that you can use. Oh, yeah, you can't use it for this.
Tracy, were you sitting next to me when I won that pie? No, it was my coworker was sitting next to me when I won the pie.
So, for the record, full clarification, Tom was not sassing Azure SQL Database Edge, which is now Azure SQL Edge. They dropped the database. I'm gonna have to remember that. Just as it will take me, it'll take me about a year to remember that. Sort of like how it took me roughly 3 years to use the term Sentry 1 regularly instead of SQL Sentry.
It'll be
The database is still named SQL Sentry, though. Even
The
with
database
the
is.
install.
It is.
And actually, I think the product is still called SQL Sentry. It's just
Yes.
the company name changed to Sentry 1.
They want to confuse us.
Yes.
It was very confusing. I still remember it was at a SQL Saturday at the very end of the day, and I wrote down Sentry 1 because I knew I was going to say it wrong, and I'm talking about this, and I just blurred out SQL Sentry because I'd used it for so many years that it was etched into my mind as it needs to be SQL Sentry. And as soon as it came out, I knew, I just said the wrong one. We need a flowchart of Azure names.
I'd like to have a flow chart of just Azure objects and how they all link together.
Yeah,
it's
the
kinda like,
100 and some things in Azure. It's like, I
Yeah.
need to store data in a table. Okay, here's about a dozen different ways to do it off the top of my head. Oh, great. How do they relate?
and I think that's part of the confusion when people start trying to go to Azure and stuff. It's like, what?
It's a lot of
know,
options.
Oh, yeah.
There's so many different options and stuff, and it's almost worse than trying to know all the different options within the SQL Server on-prem edition. I think it's worse.
Oh, easily, because at least with on-prem, things typically do different things. But, like, I can explain the difference if you give me enough time. But somebody just hits you up, hey, do I need to do this new thing in Azure Queues and Service Bus and Event Hubs and IoT Hub in one of the couple of other ways of storing and queuing data? Maybe I should spin up a Kafka cluster. Should I use Confluent Online? Should I use one of these other products? Well, they all do different things different ways and have different levels of expertise required and different specific scenarios. And if you really understand the differences between them, you can get a lot out of it. But for most people, you look at that and say, why are there 6 options for put data into queue, take data out of queue?
Yeah,
And then with a database, well, actually, one of my favorite things right now, Azure Databricks allows you to run Spark in Azure. Azure Synapse Analytics allows you to run Spark in Azure. HD Insight allows you to run Spark in Azure. SQL Server Big Data Clusters allow you to run Spark in Azure. And you ask, when do I use SQL Server Big Data Clusters versus Synapse Analytics versus Databricks versus HD Insight? And if you ask the right person, you will get a reasonable answer. But that right person is usually somebody who works at Microsoft on one of those product teams. Andrews is switching to Oracle Cloud, where he doesn't have to worry about multiple things because you only get one thing, and that is a little button that says pay Larry Ellison more money.
Yeah. Well, I personally, I kind of think the downfall of Azure is going to be that there are so many different options, choices, and stuff. Because what if there is some little niche there and you choose the wrong thing? You choose the wrong one. So
that can happen, and I think it's difficult, and I know that there are people who try to do this, but disambiguating the different concepts in Azure. There are something like 100+ services across Azure. And trying to understand when and where for each of those is going to be daunting, especially for someone who's just brand new to it. If you have a very focused task, then you can probably get away. Going back to queuing, you can probably get away with any of them. And
but is one of them more performant than the other one is? Do you know that? Which one
yes.
do you choose?
And you wouldn't necessarily know that. For many scenarios, it may not matter a huge amount. Then when it does matter, yeah, switching over and having switching costs sucks, but at least it's not buying new hardware.
Yeah, but it's, if you spent 3 years setting up your queuing in certain way in in one of those new microservice hubs, and you're moving data all around and all that kind of fun stuff, and you're using one certain queuing, and then all of a sudden, hey, that's not the one you should be using because it's not the most performant. You should be using this one. And now you're going to have to spend a year changing everything around.
True. That is painful. Okay, so the question came in chat. Isn't Canonical Oracle? Isn't Jupyter Canonical? No, Canonical is the company behind Ubuntu. And they're not owned by Oracle. Jupyter is an open source product that I don't believe has a corporate owner. NumFocus. So I'm currently Googling. So NumFocus is an open source organization, and they sponsor a number of especially Python products. So again, they may have sponsors. They do have sponsors, but they're not owned by a company. So this isn't a scenario like the Apache Spark project being owned by Databricks. Is Java Oracle? Yeah, once they said that Java 1.8 you had to pay for it, that was when Microsoft switched over to say that, oh, we're going to use Azul Zulu version of Java based off of the OpenJDK instead of Oracle SE for SQL Server 2019, because then you don't have to pay that extra licensing to Oracle. But even within that, yeah, there's still non-Oracle Java. There is OpenSDK, which ironically enough is still run by Oracle, but there are competitors in that space like Azul Systems, where they are not Oracle. They are independent of Oracle. They still use that same OpenSDK as their baseline, but it's still a separate company. Can't really joke that big companies aren't doing anything. Well, specifically, that was a knock on Oracle and Oracle Cloud, which I guess the first joke around it is which version of Oracle Cloud, the first failure, the second failure, or the third failure. And that was my alternative joke for it.
What about Google Cloud?
Google Cloud is about the fourth. Oracle Cloud is not now going on-prem. So at that point, it's Oracle Fog. So Google Cloud is pretty big. They are, if I remember right, like the fourth largest cloud provider. Because it's Amazon and Azure, Alibaba, and then Google, if I remember correctly. But that 3 and 4 bounce around a little bit. And you've got other players in there as well. But for as big a company as they are, Google's cloud always feels like an also-ran. Even Rackspace tries to sell themselves as cloud now. Yeah, that way they can try to say we're bigger than Google. So back to Azure Notebooks. Boy, We hit
Now,
those
is that
tangents hard.
on Azure Notebooks? You're talking about the Azure edition in the cloud, right? You're not talking about Azure Data Studio notebooks. That'll still be around, right?
That is absolutely correct. So I'm talking about notebooks.azure.com, which allows you to build out projects, run notebooks off of really cheap, essentially spot instance VMs, and totally different from running a notebook in Azure Data Studio, running a notebook in Visual Studio Code, or one of the other dozen ways you can run notebooks. And in fact, as Azure Notebooks shuts down, they give you a few options on what you can do. The notebook experience is at Microsoft, and they give you a link in case you are one of those people like me who actually did use Azure Notebooks. And the first thing that they tell you is, well, you could run it in Visual Studio Code, or in Tom's case, in Azure Data Studio. Essentially, if all you want to do is run notebooks, they're saying, here you go, run it locally, or combined with Azure Machine Learning, you can spin up an instance of a VM and run those notebooks remotely. There's a nice plugin for Visual Studio Code that links you to Azure VM, or excuse me, to Azure ML, Visual Studio Code Spaces is something I'm going to be looking into because it feels like it's sort of the successor to Azure Notebooks. It is a paid service. It is something like $6 per month for storing project details. And then you get charged about 9 cents an hour on basic tier, and then about 17 cents an hour for standard. So your high end, if you leave things running, probably talking somewhere in the $50 per month club. And that's if you're running 24/7. And these servers will shut themselves off, so if you're not really using them, you don't get charged for the whole month. Azure ML is definitely an option here, and is probably the option that they're pushing hardest. Which, now that they've cleaned up their act a bit on Azure ML, I am going to come back and look at it. What I think would be Tom's favorite option is Azure Lab Services. So converting those notebooks into Azure Labs.
Oh, Azure Labs is rocks, man. That is really nice.
Yeah, basically give a pre-configured VM, and installed on that is Jupyter Notebooks with all of your code, all of your scripts, everything you need prepped, ready to go.
Yep, that's exactly what's happening. Here you go.
And then it's available for the next 8 hours.
No, it's available however long you set it up.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So like, hey, I'm doing a pre-con here or a full day training. All right, well, this is available for the next 12 hours, or maybe you're nice and you leave it up for 2 more days. I'll give you until Monday afternoon, and then I'm going to shut these things off.
Depends on how much you as the speaker want to pay for it. So
right. So
the only thing I would wish they would do there in labs.azure.com is, like, it says you're supposed to have a volume license for Windows. Your company's supposed to have a volume license for Windows. And I'm like going, why don't you just up the price of Azure Lab and let you basically choose between whether you've got the extra licenses for the Azure Lab and just pay for the Windows that you're going to have up for. Let's say you're doing a 3-hour class, so you're going to let them have it for 5 hours. So, okay, I want to pay for a Windows license for 5 hours. Yeah. I don't need it for a year. I don't need it for whatever. I need it for a whole 5 hours is all I need it for.
Right. I mean, you can do that with any sort of Windows VM and Azure VMs. It seems weird that you can't do it with Labs.
You can't do that in Azure Lab. It very clearly tells you when you start out, if you're going to spin up Windows, you should have licensing agreement, volume licensing agreement.
That is
strange.
Kooky.
Yeah, it is a bit strange that they're doing it that way.
This is a good reason to run everything on Linux.
Well, yes, it is. Except I can't do encryption, all my encryption stuff in Linux. So
That's true. That's true. Well, in the VM, you could install VMware Player and then install a trial copy of Windows. And
yeah, you could always install. You could always go install the a 6-month evaluator edition of Windows, evaluation of Windows.
Ah,
So,
this
but
seems like
yeah, it's kind of crazy that
problem
they
we
don't
should
just
avoid.
charge you a little bit more for the license for the temporary, because they can make a killing doing that.
Yeah, and I mean it's not going to be that much more. If you look at the difference in prices between Windows VMs and Linux VMs and Azure, it's a few pennies per hour, if that.
Yeah.
So it's not a huge difference. Nonetheless, Azure Labs is the other option that they recommend. And for somebody who's teaching, this is probably the best option. If you're just playing around with notebooks and want to run them yourself locally, then Visual Studio Code's probably your best bet. If you want to collaborate with people, share them with a small group of people, GitHub plus Visual Studio Code, or frankly, installing Anaconda and using Jupyter Notebooks in there, I think is a better experience than what Visual Studio Code offers. It's also a little bit better than Azure Data Studio if you don't use SQL as your kernel. If you do use SQL as your kernel, then you're basically living in Azure Data Studio. You're not going anywhere else right now.
Yeah, the one thing to denote, Kevin, to make sure everybody's aware, the Azure Labs is really, if you're going to be teaching a class of 20, 30, 40, 100, 200 students or whatever, and you're trying to quickly replicate and not have someone have to set up their own machine and then have all those problems setting that thing up. You can set up a template and then you send them a link and then it spins them up a clone of your template.
Okay, yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
So it's more for teaching classes.
That's fair. That's fair. So Mala's not here, which means that Mala's book corner is not going to happen tonight. I will talk about, I just started reading. This is just arrived.
Kevin's book corner.
Yeah, this is Mala's book corner Kevin edition. So Learn Azure in a Month of Lunches. Let me get this out of the light. By Ian Folds, who is a technical writer for Microsoft. So this is specifically the second edition. It just came out. Manning published it. I think it arrived in my mail about 3 days ago. So I have just started to read it. And it's not going to be too surprising. So the point of it is to give you an overview of Azure. It won't go into the 6 different methods that you can use for queuing data. Not to mention third-party products like Confluent Platform. But it will give you an idea of where things fit together and also things that I like that I think more people need to spend time thinking about around security, around resource management. And there's a whole chapter on Azure Resource Manager and building ARM templates. ARM templates felt a little scary, but I think it's worth learning about. I think it's, if you're going to be any sort of administrator in Azure, it's good to know, or even a developer in Azure, it is good to know how to use the PowerShell prompt, to use the Azure command line, and be able to spin up resources using ARM templates, because that's the type of thing you can put in source control and rebuild if somebody in sales who happens to be an owner of the resource group accidentally deletes the thing because didn't like the way it was named.
And Kevin, you can get the PDF of that online if you don't mind giving some information to Microsoft.
That makes sense. Like I mentioned, Ian works for Microsoft, and looks like this might actually be. I wonder if this is the full version or if this is a preview. But yeah, I see the link. Let me drop that in chat here as well.
I'll give you the link I found. So, and then it's got a link over to Microsoft's website on the blog.
Yeah, to azure.microsoft.com.
Yeah.
So you can get that for free if you tell Microsoft a little bit about who you are.
Mainly,
or you could just pay
telephone number.
Manning.
That was a requirement, unfortunately. So 333-333-3333 until you fill it all up.
That's my phone number too.
I'm not going there. I already know who you are, Tracy. So
I know.
they already have all your information.
I know.
When that salesperson reaches out, like, nah, I'm still just using my my free $150 a month credit for Azure. So let's wrap up tonight talking about jobs. Oh, Raymond is calling us. He's going to call us both the same time because we have the same number. It's a weird party line situation. So, how long should you stay at a job? And I'm going to take this two separate ways, and we'll see how it rolls from here. The first one is there a minimum number of years? The second one is, what are the conditions that say, yeah, it's time to leave?
Very interesting. Should I start this? Since
Sure,
I'm probably
go for it,
since I'm probably the one with the most long tenured jobs in the history. So, and with that said, my last job that I worked for a company was 17 years. And this one I'm currently on, I'm pushing 8. Coming at the beginning of the year, I'll be 8 years there. So it all depends upon, to me, the reason I left. Let's talk about the reason I left the 17-year job, because you were thinking, okay, well, if he's there 17 years, why don't he just stay as the rest of his life? But they got to a point that they no longer supported continuing to upgrade and continuing to progress in their technology. And then the second thing that they stopped doing was basically supporting any training efforts. So, the last time with them that I went to SQL Pass, not only did I pay for it, but I also even had to take vacation to go. And that was kind of the deal breaker, and said, okay, maybe it is time to go look. So those are the two things that really drove me to a new job is, A, how do they look at technology, and are they not necessarily do they have to be bleeding edge, because we're just now in the process, we've converted all of our developers, but we're in the process of going to QA to do 2019. But are they kind of moving to that pattern, and do they allow you to move that? When I started the current job, I had a SQL Server 2000, a SQL Server 2005, and some old technology, but I was allowed to basically get all those systems upgraded. And now the lowest version we have is 2016. So that's my theories. Tracy, you're on the other end of the spectrum.
I've stayed at jobs like 7 and 9 years before, but more recently I haven't. So I've had some experience at staying long. I was at Channel Advisor for 6, so that's 3 long-term jobs in my book. But as far as staying someplace at a minimum amount of time, I try to do 2 to 3 years at a minimum. hasn't worked out for me recently, but it's working out right now. Um, and I've had a lot of problems with bosses, so that tends to be my reason for shifting places. And one shift over was due to technology as well. I mean, we were running a lot of 2000s, and there was no training, and the people were hard to get along with, and it was just time to go after 9 years. So, and then I've just progressively had different things along the way that were boss related, starting very early in my career. Very early at 18, I had a terrible boss, and it just progressed on through my career to where I've only had like 2 good bosses.
So normally for me, it's not necessarily money that would make me move. It's more of other extenuating circumstances. And I agree with you, Tracy. Bosses can be one of them. But I've kind of learned, at least in my long careers, you wait long enough, your boss changes. So
Yeah.
you know.
The one company like that I stayed at for 9 years, the boss never changed.
Oh wow.
And he let my coworker just not answer the pager, and he did nothing about it. He always said he was going to, but he never did. So I was basically 24/7 on call instead of every 3 weeks, because 2 of my coworkers didn't answer the pager sometimes. And it just got to the point where that just was not the environment I wanted to work in anymore. He was a nice guy and all, like personally he was nice, but he just didn't stick his foot down on anything. And if you're not going to manage your people to the point where one of your employees can actually get some sleep.
Yeah.
The pager would go off literally every other day.
My 17-year career, I was on call a lot also, because all the batch processing happened in the middle of the night. So that was a lot of fun. It took a while for me to get people trained up to where I wasn't the only one getting called every week.
Well, see, they had a problem where it was automatically, like if he didn't answer the phone, they were supposed to call the boss, and the boss was supposed to tell him who to call. They just skipped that process and just started like, if he didn't answer, called me. If she didn't answer, called me. And then he wouldn't even know that they called me unless it became a major incident report that got filed and stuff. And then he would be upset that they called me. But it's like, oh, who else were they going to call? You were going to tell them to call me. You had another option. He was a DB2 person, so there's no way he was going to get involved in it. And he was a manager at that, so he probably didn't even know how to use DB2 anymore.
So Kevin, what about you?
All right, so first I'm going to round up chat here. The Duke mentions conditions for leaving: stay until you get bored, or if the money comes in. Ray mentions mostly about money, family, and training. Those good reasons. Anders sniffs the market after about 2 years just to stay in touch. The Duke mentions leaving frequently has always led to more money for most people. But Anders is like, only my first job change was specifically for the money. So, rounding a couple of these things out, minimum number of years. When I started my career, about 2007, the expectation was 5 years. That you stay at a job for 5 years. If you see somebody less than 5 years, you kind of wonder what's wrong. And if the person has a career of that and they're not explicitly, I'm a consultant who has worked at these engagements for 18 to 24 months, then you get a negative impression that this person's a job hopping ne'er-do-well. And today, 2 years. 2 years is the norm at this point. And I think part of it is that the workplace has flattened out considerably with respect to your ability to grow. And money is a specific part of this, because if I come into a company as a database administrator, I don't have DBA 1, DBA 2, DBA 3, DBA 4 that I can work toward. In most companies, I don't have any sort of progression. It is essentially, you are a database administrator, and you may take on more responsibilities, you may do other things, but you get to the point where you're tapped out, and the company's not going to keep paying you more money because you're taking on these responsibilities. No, you're in the system now, so you get the same 2%, 3% raise that everybody else gets because that's the way things work. And essentially, where you used to stick in a role and move up 60 years ago, or switch in departments and move up. So I went from being a junior person in one department to switching over to another division within the company and getting a pay increase, getting a title change. You can't do that anymore at companies because there's nowhere to move up. So you move out, and that usually gets you more money. And then you even see people like job hopping between the same 3, 4, 5 companies, where they'll go to one for a couple of years, go to another one, get a salary increase, hop to another one, and then go back to the first. Because, hey, I didn't mind the company at all. I just wanted more money. The Duke mentions never got 5. Yeah, that maybe, perhaps that was a Midwestern thing even at that point, because the number has been shrinking over time. You go back 20, 30 years ago, and that expectation was generally a lot larger. Anders does mention nobody batted an eye 4 jobs in 5 years in the 90s. And I guess it also depends on your industry as well. So, especially in the Midwest, you were generally going to be sticking around for the long haul. Calvin mentions 30 years ago, companies viewed employees as assets. Today, they are viewed as expenses. Yeah, you're a resource. You are a meat widget. That's why there's human resources to deal with the meat widgets. Things have changed. What I described at IBM, but it wasn't that way in the 80s or 90s or aughts. Yeah, and yeah, this isn't the old AT&T where you had Kernighan and Ritchie sticking around or Bell Labs where they're sticking around for 20, 30 years. Or places like Battelle today where you get in there, you tend to stay there for decades. For a lot of companies, essentially, you're there, you work, you leave. And if you want to move up in any way, you have to move out. So, conditions, I think you guys brought up some really good points. Human capital. So, human capital has a specific meaning, and you're going to talk to the economist in me, and that's not people. Human capital is the set of skills that a person has. So that's not degrading like I think the term human resources is. Because now you're paper clips. Meat widgets and paper clips. Mike, go ahead, Tom.
Well, if you'll notice that, of course, my hair is quite gray, so I am up there. So
yeah, you're what, like 34?
Do what?
I said you're what, 34 years old?
I wish. Anyway, it's to the point that I'm in my retirement job. I don't want 1,000 databases, 1,500, whatever servers or whatever. I literally have at my job one production server. So it's got failover cluster instance, it's got all the availability group in it, but it's encryption, a bunch of other stuff. But I stay busy, very busy, even though it's one.
That's fair. I thought you said human cattle. That I may switch that around with meat widgets and just throw in human cattle every once in a while.
But yeah, I could understand exactly where you guys are coming from. To me, it takes several years, just a lot of times, to understand all the data structure and everything that you're dealing with. So jumping around every 2 years, it's very difficult, possibly to know. A lot of times to understand how things work quick, fast, and all that kind of stuff, and get them to work most performant, you need to understand how the data works and how the business works.
Yeah, and Calvin mentions another difficulty, COVID-19, where Calvin was unfortunately laid off in March. Really sorry to hear that. And for months, you had companies just saying, we're not going to hire. um, that we're just not going to hire. It's no money in the budget. We're not doing anything. And that, unfortunately, now, fortunately, it's clearing up a bit. But depending on the region of the country you're in, it may take several more months before you really start to see jobs coming back.
Well, on the opposite end of that, at my job, I have a guy that was working on another database, MySQL, and kind of doing with it and stuff like that. And the interesting thing about that is that I am teaching him how to be a SQL Server DBA at the current time. So I'm instructing him, basically teaching him everything about SQL Server and stuff. So he's in a fortunate position because he probably couldn't get hired for the position because he didn't have the information. But because he was in the right place at the right time, he's going to end up with the job.
Yeah, and we have talked about this a little bit in prior episodes, shoptalk.tripass.org, where we covered, well, what can you do especially if you're starting out in a career? And the answer is, unfortunately, right now, it's hard.
It is hard.
Hopefully things settle down. The closing note that I'm going to give, I think Mike points this out, 2020, the year of stupid. And that's fair. That's fair. Let's just end 2020. We'll just scratch it off the calendar, go straight to 2021. Maybe it'll be a better year.
It's interesting. The other day, I was listening to Chacon's Bob Ward talk, and if you're looking for a job, Bob Ward says a lot of times Microsoft's still hiring in support, and he's like going. He and I agree with him. Support's probably the hardest job ever because you've got so many different areas you need to learn. So if you're out there looking, maybe look at Microsoft support.
That's an option. So with that, we are going to wrap up Shop Talk for the evening. Thanks to everybody in chat. Thank you all who contributed thoughts, ideas, and questions. And we're going to be here next week. Same bat time, same bat channel, unless I get sued for using that phrase. And finally, Calvin mentions now companies want you to be an expert in everything, especially before hiring. You have to know everything about our systems before we hire you. Yeah, it's hiring practices are weird.
It's called the master of everything, jack of all trades, and you don't know anything. Yeah.
Yep. So on that note, we will wrap up. Thank you so much, Tracy and Tom, for coming in here tonight. Thank you all to chat, and we'll see you next time.
Good night.
Have a good evening.